Wei Mei, thank you for coming on the Carbon Exposure Project. It's a pleasure to have you. I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks, Renee. It seems like just yesterday that we first met
Oh,
over
I
lunch
remember that time.
at Capital.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for context for the audience, when I first moved, well, when I moved back to Singapore, I want to say in 2022, really the first people that I reached out to were you and Tom from ACX. And essentially, I'm not sure if you remember how I phrased it, but it was like, hey guys, I'm in your backyard. I just want to pay my dues. And then you're like, hello, that's kind of unusual. And then we had a really wonderful conversation and lunch. And it really, for me, brought home that there can be competitors. And for context, obviously, at the time, I was on the side at CBL and you're at ACX. So there's a perception that there's competition, but in that competition, there's fraternity. Like we're collaborators, and I really felt that hospitality and that welcoming nature from you and Tom, and I really want to say thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out. I mean, we were actually really happy that you reached out to us because it's a fellow exchange that's in the market. A
Yeah,
lot of people think that all the exchanges are all about the competition, but really what we're involved in is building the whole market together.
exactly.
And there is competition, but there's also camaraderie.
Camaraderie,
There's so
exactly.
much exchange going on. So the
Literally,
exchanges are
exactly. Figuratively,
having
literally. I like that.
their own exchanges. And even across CBL and Air Carbon Exchange, I mean, it's like we've seen how similar some of our contract specs are, and the market actually trades across exchanges and
Exactly.
creates a richer ecosystem,
That's a
a
really
more
that's
liquid
a
market.
really important point that I like to stress if you'll indulge me. From the outside, I have a perception of what ACX does,
Uh,
and but we had a chat off camera around the kind of evolving nature of the business model. For traditional exchanges, it's you have your objective is to drive liquidity, you have standardized contracts, you might have individual projects transacting,
yeah,
but then there's a broader ecosystem that you're essentially helping to foster and develop. I'd love to unpack that with you if you can. Can
yeah.
you talk me
So
through that?
everyone hears about ACX and they know about the two exchanges which we own and operate. We have one in Singapore and another regulated exchange in the UAE. But also Air Carbon
ACX.
also okay, we'll
Just for
cut that out.
context, no,
Yeah.
it's funny
Also,
because it's a rebrand, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a rebrand.
But it's
So
okay. I still fumble like that. Expansive's undergone like probably 5 or 6 different name
oh
changes. I won't
really?
even tell you some of the ones. We stumbled right out of the gate in
Yeah.
2017. But effectively, a company comes into its own with regards to its identity. And the name on the front is part of it, right?
Yes.
That's the identity. It's kind of like naming a child, but it's the idea and the mission of the people behind it. I still stumble
Right.
internally. So it's just funny. I think
So
it's great.
so I guess for me, it's like being one of the first few employees at ACX.
Yeah.
When I joined, it was Air Carbon, and now it's ACX. I mean, we've rebranded because not only do we see ourselves as a carbon exchange, but we see ourselves as an exchange for various environmental products.
That's great.
So as we were talking about our exchanges earlier, I mean, ACX has our Singapore-based exchange
Mhm.
as well as our UAE exchange,
Yep.
but we also have a second business which I think we just had a few more announcements about recently. So
I
our
saw
second
those.
business is
That's fantastic.
actually our software as a service. We're white labeling our exchange platform
Great.
to jurisdictions as well as clients who require their own carbon trading platform.
Okay.
Or even if they need a lighter solution to access the international carbon markets, we're providing that infrastructure to them.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic. Can you give me some context around a very recent announcement? I think actually just yesterday, you announced a partnership with IDX in Indonesia. Can you give me some context there?
So in the past 2 weeks, we've had quite a few announcements. We've announced actually an MOU with the Greek exchange ACX
Hmm.
to develop a voluntary carbon exchange with them.
I saw that.
And then on Tuesday, just this past week, and I just came back from Jakarta, Air Carbon participated in the launch of IDX Carbon, which is Indonesia's carbon exchange.
Okay.
So that's national infrastructure and it actually runs on air carbon technology. But IDX
Great.
itself is operating the exchange, and the team there has done an incredible job because it's not just the platform that makes an exchange, it's also all the regulations and the entire supporting ecosystem around it.
Exactly. The
So,
onboarding of market participants, the driving
absolutely.
liquidity and the innovation behind. You talked about the instruments piece. Ultimately, in Indonesia, they're going to have a different flavor, right? From a regulatory
Absolutely.
perspective, and also in terms of the participants as well.
Yeah, it's going to be their own market. It's going to support their domestic market. And Indonesia is such a large and significant market, and the needs of its participants are so complex that it also needs a platform that meets these requirements. So it was a customization that was done by ACX for IDX. And it's probably one of the highlights of my career and a real
great.
privilege
Oh,
to have,
congratulations.
to have won the RFP and to be working on it.
That's fantastic. Quick question, and this is a little bit esoteric and a bit nerdy.
Yeah.
But is it the same central limit order book so that the liquidity across IDX Carbon is also across the broader ecosystem that ACX is developing across UAE and Singapore as well?
ACX rather has the capacity to do that. We are able to link order books if the client requests it. In the case of Indonesia, it is very much a standalone exchange for them right now until the Indonesian government, their regulators, and IDX is ready for more.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
fascinating. Okay, so can I now take it back a little bit, because I'd love to learn a little bit more about you and your journey, because I feel that sometimes, as practitioners, we're kind of just in the game, and we're kind of, it's kind of that old adage of like failing to see the forest for the trees, right? We're just so much in it. I'd love to learn about how did you get into this very esoteric space around carbon?
ACX?
Yeah, how did you get into ACX? You said you were one of the early employees. I'd love to hear that story.
Oh, well, it all starts out with a very young Wei Mei winning a scholarship to go overseas.
Okay. Where was that to?
That was to the US.
Okay.
And I went to University of Minnesota and then to Yale University, and I did economics, lots and lots of economics.
Okay.
And then I returned home to work for the Singapore government.
Okay.
One of my postings was to the Energy Market Authority.
All right.
So actually the Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore, Mr. Lawrence Wong, was the CEO at that time. So I had the privilege of working under him as well. So I suppose I cut my teeth in the world of energy, in the Energy Market Authority, learned about power generation, regulation of the energy markets.
Right.
And from there, I slowly found my way into the National Climate Change Secretariat in the Prime Minister's office in Singapore. And the Singapore Civil Service is an excellent place to learn so much about, governance, processes, and the ethos of the civil service is actually something that I've taken along with me throughout my whole career. But also, I found myself yearning for something different. I wasn't very sure what it was.
Right.
And I think it was just part of my personal and professional evolution. And I actually left the government and joined SP, which is a which is actually a utilities company.
Okay.
And I realized that while I had changed my position, there was still a hunger for more, and I wasn't very sure what it was until the co-founders of ACX actually showed up on the scene, and they said, "Hey, we have this concept of a carbon exchange that's going to run on blockchain," and it was just kind of, they were trying to describe it to me. And I remember at my first interview, as it turns out, I had worked on something similar in my time at government. And at my first interview with Bill and Tom, the co-founders of ACX, they actually pulled out a pen and drew out my initial understanding and architecture for what Air Carbon or ACX could be. And then Bill said, "You're hired."
You're hired.
Yeah. and
the joys of a startup. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and they asked, would you like to be a part of this adventure? I remember the phrase that Bill used was, "Would you like to be part of this adventure?" And I said, "Well, yes." And so I joined ACX. Back then it was known as Air Carbon. And I joined ACX, and depending on how you count everybody who was in there at that point in time, I believe I think, the 5th employee in ACX. And just this morning, I was teaching a class, and I was talking to the class about how when our platform was finally ready for launch after about 6 months of me joining, Tom said, "Why don't we start up our client list?" And I started up the Excel spreadsheet. I named it client list, and I opened it and it was blank. And that's where we started.
Great, blank.
It was blank.
Paper, fabulous. And then now fast forward, how many years?
Well, I've been in ACX for 3.5 years, and we've grown from that blank client list to over 180 clients in 32 countries.
Wow.
We have 2 exchanges, one in Singapore, one in the UAE. We are assisting with the infrastructure for other jurisdictions as well. And we just helped support IDX Carbon's launch. So it's been a really exciting journey for us.
That sounds fascinating. Thank you for that. That's a great introduction. I'm drinking a lot of my cocktails, so I'm going to cheers to that.
Cheers.
Thanks
to that.
Cheers.
Yes. Thank you.